And then all of a sudden, about halfway through the monologue, something or someone overtakes me, bro. And I leap off the stage. I take a knee in front of Dr. Riley, and I finish the monologue. It ends, and she looks at me slack-jawed.
Hi, welcome to Storia, where storytellers disrupt. I'm Fabiano Altamora.
And I'm David Noroña.
We have got the exciting opportunity today to interview Mr. David Noroña, my brother from another mother. So will you start off, bro? Tell us, where were you brought up?
Man, I was brought in. I like to joke that I was brought up in Havana, the sequel, which is Hialeah, Florida. Only Cubans would know this town. It was just working class, simple, good, honest people that left, basically fleeing Castro in Cuba.
Wow.
From Cuba in 59-60. My grandfather actually had to escape in the trunk of a car through the sewers, over the wall of the Panamanian embassy to get out of the country because he wouldn't turn over a couple of his friends who were accused of bombing Castro's forces. So that's the town where I grew up, man.
Wow. What was that like growing up there?
Dude, we were simple people. I mean, for me, it was BMXs. It was streets that would flood when it rained too much because we're at sea level in Hialeah. It was a time when kids could go out and you'd hear your grandmother, call out, and you'd come home, when the sun was setting. Just good, honest, simple, working class people. Yeah,
it's very family oriented. Because I think our cultures, I'm Italian,
Cuban.
You're Cuban, and I think that family environment and the way you were brought up, was. When you reminisce back to the 80s, and I know you're considerably older than I am, but you were 60s, right? 50s?
72.
No,
72. I'm turning 50 this year, man.
I know you are, bro.
Yeah.
I'm excited to go to wherever we choose to go. Anyway.
Yeah.
But I love the element that we were brought up in these fiery families. Now, being brought up in that environment, how the heck do you go from that to deciding you want to be an actor?
Yeah, it's funny. I often joke, I have this stock joke about that the closest thing there was to culture in my home was Cuban coffee, mangoes, and salsa music. Because they were simple people. I mean, my grandmother had gone to college, but very few people in my family had actually gone to college or university. So I wasn't taking dance classes. There was no music theater to be heard of. Movies were, whatever was on TV. I mean, this is pre-VHS. It's I think one of the first films I saw was Flashdance inappropriately. I had teenage parents, so there were no guardrails whatsoever. So I had no concept of culture as we know it as actors. For me, that turn came much, much later in high school.
How did it come about? I mean, let's just quickly go back and go.
Yeah.
You were brought up by teenage parents.
Yeah. My dad was so young, legally, he couldn't go up to the hospital room where I was being born because he was 15 years old. My mom was 17. This was teenage romance. This is kids raising kids. I mean, my dad is so young that we joke about going to Denny's together for the retiree, double AARP blue plate special together. I mean, my dad's just in his mid 60s. I'm about to be 50. Yeah.
Gosh.
My dad and I were so close. Most people thought he was just my older brother. So, but my mom, this is something I got to brag on for a second, specifically with things that are happening in culture right now. When my mom, when we found out that my mom was pregnant, not me, but her family found out, the first question was, on what mattress? Let's get rid of that. Secondly, my grandfather said, you quit high school now because you've humiliated me enough.
Oh, no.
But my mom had such deep conviction. Even at 17 years old, she actually told my dad, they weren't married at the time. She said to my dad, you can marry me or not marry me, but I'm having this boy. She hid the pregnancy for 6 or 7 months.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was the early 70s, so she had baggy clothes on.
Right, and she's tiny, your mom,
and she's
anyway.
She's so
tiny,
petite
gosh.
and tiny. And so anyways, it was a pretty dramatic story. And my parents, God bless them, man, they did their best. They stuck together for about 15 years. And I was super blessed to have, even though they were young, It took a village. My grandparents really were proxy parents for me. Like, I wouldn't be who I am without my praying Catholic, then turned Lutheran, praying grandmother.
Yeah, it's the prayers of our parents. You know, when you think of our kids, all we want our kids to do is have an encounter with Jesus. And I just hope one day they'll go, it was because of my praying parents that I came to know Jesus. So, like, this is a very kind of unconventional way you were brought up, right? But you know what I'm saying,
I was cultural Catholic. I remember going to mass with my grandmother. This is pre-Vatican II or whatever, before the Pope said, "Hey, you can talk English." Yeah. So I mean, this was a full Latin mass, and my Cuban grandmother would take me. And I would get so bored that sometimes I'd like use finger guns and I'd be pointing and shooting like the candelabras and the candles and stuff. And my grandmother would say, "Niño,
don't do that.
Don't do that. You can't shoot in church." So I'd be bored out of my mind there. But I know for a fact that I came to believe because of my grandmother Judith.
It's those deposits. 100%. It's never wasted. God wastes nothing, does it? It's those deposits. So like from there, then obviously you weren't brought up in an artistic per se background.
Not at all.
So how did you go from like being brought up with teenage parents, Catholic environment, to then going, I want to spend the rest of my life being an actor?
A lot of freedom, a lot of imagination. My dad worked at a computer factory, so he would bring home like early LED lights, and I'd make spaceships out of it. So I always had like a very vivid imagination, and I've always been intrigued by, frankly, like science in many ways. Like I love this idea that you can make anything and go anywhere. I didn't realize that was the precursor to my storytelling imagination. I think the big turn for me was there's this guy named Danny Fickle who in junior high said, "Hey, there's this program, this International Baccalaureate program at this very posh high school." Because I mean, I was in working class neighborhood, so I was destined to go to another high school. Had it not been that we moved from one neighborhood to another, had I not met this really genius young guy who ended up serving in the military, he's still friends with me, Danny Fickle. He said, "Hey, there's this program." So I remember that I wrote the application, but I was gritty, but I was a little bit ignorant. So I remember on my application, I actually said, I need to be accepted because it's a dog eat dog, not dog eat dog world. Thank God they needed some Cubans and some Hispanics to round out the quota. And I got accepted to this really posh high school in this rich neighborhood where I had the privilege of having instructors, high school English teachers that had PhDs that wrote for the SATs. Dr. Riley and Peggy Hall, these two women changed the course of my life.
So you did the IB?
I did the IB, man.
Wow,
Listen, I didn't complete it.
Oh, you didn't?
The International Baccalaureate program was made for diplomats' kids so that they would have equal education wherever they were in the country. So I was one of the first years. I ended up getting all the AP classes and stuff, but I kind of backed off the IB thing because it was a little bit above my pay grade, to be totally. I mean, I was in school with kids that went on to MIT.
Wow.
Like really brilliant. So like, what is it? High tides raise all boats or whatever. Yeah, I was one of the other boats, and these guys raised me up. But in this, there were these women, these female teachers who were absolutely brilliant. And I'll never forget that they were doing Sound of Music and they needed a Kurt Von Trapp, whose one of two lines is, "I'm 11 almost." And I looked 11 when I was in high school. And I did Sound of Music. And I thought at that point, man, I was headed to medical school.
Right.
I was headed to medical school. I was a good Cuban kid. I was like, I got to do something better than my parents, right? I mean, that's the hope of any immigrant culture. And I was in Sound of Music, and it started the turn. It started the change of my life.
Isn't it funny, though, that your parents only know what they know?
Oh, yeah.
But if you have inspirational teachers, they can literally change the course of your entire life.
100%.
You know what I mean? You're inspired by them. A lot of the time, what I encounter a lot is like, I love Shakespeare. So Shakespeare is one of my jams. I just think he's a genius. He is a genius. I mean, he's probably the most famous playwright.
Like lightning hitting lightning in a bottle. Yeah.
But why then do most people hate? When I start teaching Shakespeare at BCA, people go in with a little bit of trepidation. People go in saying, I don't enjoy Shakespeare. It's boring. I'm like, it's because you weren't taught it right.
Correct.
You know what I mean? So, you go in and you go, oh, we read Shakespeare. Shakespeare's not meant to be read. It's meant to be played.
100%.
The word of God is meant to be heard, right? So for you then, these ladies, how did they inspire you?
Well, there was one little precursor, and it goes back to Danny, and I'm so glad you mentioned this because it's actually related to Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So I remember I was a scrawny middle schooler. I'm in 9th grade, and I'm working out with Danny, Danny Fickle, this buddy of mine, and he's got a boombox, and randomly, this is just quintessential Danny. Like, it makes no sense. We were probably listening to like Beastie Boys, and then he decides we should listen to Hamlet while we do weights. So he brings out on cassette.
That's awesome, dude.
Richard Burton's performance.
Wow. His voice.
Like butter on gravy steak. Like, I don't know how to describe. If you've never heard Richard Burton, and there's so many other brilliant performances as well, but on cassette, and then he had his grandfather or great-grandfather's hardcover copy, this little edition of Hamlet that he brought out that was 110 years old. So I remember I'm like, 13, 14, 15 years old, and he puts on this boombox, Richard Burton, and he starts with this mellifluous, buttery voice, the to be or not to be speech. And dude, it stopped me cold. I'll never forget the feeling. I'll never forget the feeling of first hearing Richard Burton's voice. And I remember this for the rest of my life. I thought, I have no idea what he's saying, but I feel as a 14-year-old exactly the way that Hamlet does. He's lost. He's searching. He doesn't know whether he wants to exist or not, what it means to exist. And dude, there was a truth and a resonance in the lines that even though I didn't understand the English words, I knew what he felt. And that's, I think, the power of Shakespeare.
I do, because I think it's the way he wrote it can only be from heaven.
It's in the music.
Because it's in the iambic, that's the heartbeat. So you're resonating on a human level with that heartbeat.
There was revelation in Shakespeare that goes beyond the words. So that moment there piqued this interest. Then I had another little moment. It's funny the way that the Lord works you, where I had this girlfriend at the time. Her name is Erica Pelzer. We're still friends to this day. My wife's met her. She's a sweetheart. She was like my first girlfriend, and she was a dancer. She was a ballet dancer. You can see the theme in my life.
Yep.
I was branded like a duckling. I'm married to a dancer, and so. But I remember she was doing the Nutcracker, and afterwards she invited us on stage, to like say hi to her or whatever, after the audience was gone. And this was another seminal moment for me. I'd never been on a stage before. And the house lights were still down, right? The lights are on stage. And I remember walking out, and dude, I remember what I said. I said, I like the feeling of this. Richard Burton, that moment. Then I get to high school. I do Sound of Music. But the moment that changed it was when I auditioned for the Fantastics.
For the Fantastic, and this was
a
high school.
Yeah, it was a high school musical.
Yep.
It's this simple little story about two dads, two kids, and this kind of musical muse. And it's basically two dads that are trying to, without the kids knowing, prearrange this relationship and this marriage. It's one of the longest running musicals in the history of American music theater. I think it ran off Broadway for like 60 years.
That's crazy.
I played the boy in it. So Dr. Riley, my high school English teacher, is also like the director of this thing. And she says, David, I think now, keep in mind, I had one line, 11 almost, as Kurt Von Trapp in Sound of Music. This is the extent of my theatrical training. And she says, I think you should audition for the lead of the Fantastics, the boy. My show choir teacher, yes, I did show choir, she said to me, you've got a voice, you're a tenor. And so Doc had heard this,
right? And
she said, you need to audition. So I memorized the monologue the way I would memorize like facts for a biology test, except I know intuitively, just from watching stuff, that it should sound like it's coming from the inside of you, right? So you're like, okay, so I practice in the mirror. I'm 16 years old. By the way, 1 year older than my dad was when he became a father. And I go to the audition.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy, right? You think about that.
Crazy.
Babies raising babies. And I remember I stood on this little stage. Dr. Riley was in the house. My peers were around. And I was inexperienced, man. But just with gumption, I just got up there. And I only remember the first couple of lines. It starts with, there's this girl. There's this girl. And this boy starts to describe this girl that lives next door to him. And then all of a sudden, about halfway through the monologue, something or someone overtakes me, bro. And I leap off the stage. I take a knee in front of Dr. Riley, and I finish the monologue. It ends, and she looks at me slack-jawed, like, what the heck happened? I kind of come out of it. I never had this feeling of having a moment overtake me like this. And I got the role. What I didn't know was it wasn't a something that overtook me, but it was a someone.
And the someone?
Holy Spirit, man.
See, he had you from such a young age.
He did.
You know what I mean?
I have no reason to be alive. I mean, according to everything else, I probably should have been aborted. My dad struggled with alcohol and drugs. He probably totaled 6 to 8 cars while I was a kid. One of them caught fire.
With you in them?
Oh, yeah. I've been in so many accidents. Like, cats have 9 lives. I think I have like 13. All of this to say, I shouldn't be here today, man.
You know, I love that. I love that when we talk about this thing called theater, and we'll get back to what we were saying, it's so beautiful that God gave us this craft to be able to bless the world with.
Yeah.
Right? And so many times we've been told that it's wrong to kind of desire these things because we've been told, predominantly probably by the church, that not all churches, but performing is wrong.
Yeah.
Right? When it isn't.
It's selfish.
It's
self-centered.
Exactly. It's narcissistic. Look at me.
It can be.
I'm not saying it can't be. No, 100%. But I think when we do it in the way that we're training our students, it's a very different perspective on it.
Yeah, I think this is why I think, and we'll talk about this in the one of the future episodes, but this is why one of our core values at Bethel Conservatory of the Arts is serve.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the Lord. It's not to be served, it's to serve. And that, if you ever watch a performer that shifts it from me to them, it's a whole other experience.
It's not stars, it's servants, right? It's kind of where they're to serve the audience and the playwright,
and the
screenwriter and the director and everybody.
Yeah.
So now you'd had this amazing experience, second audition, whatever it was for you. What was the point after that you went, okay, now I'm going to audition for Carnegie Mellon, which is one of the best drama schools on the entire planet? Yeah. Like, what was your next step?
Again, man, like, so God, in retrospect, right? Hindsight is 2020. So I auditioned for this musical, and I'm well received. People are like, wow, you've got something. So Dr. Riley, again, who, by the way, I'm still in touch with. So she's cool. In her 80s. She's really been an amazing mother to me. She says to me, listen, so imagine you're in a high school in Miami, and it just so happens that your AP English Lit teacher who directs you in Fantastic says one of my former students is the associate head of drama of Carnegie Mellon. Now, I've never heard of Carnegie Mellon in my entire life. His name is Don Marinelli, and I think he's coming to town, and I want you to meet him. So I meet Don, and, Don says to me, hey, Doc says you've got something. I want you to audition for Carnegie Mellon. Again, man, I know nothing. Like, I come from a working class. I know University of Miami. At this point now, I'm in my senior year of high school. So, I'm applying to Brown, University of Miami, 7 Northwestern, a bunch of other ones. And, I got into UM Medical School. I got into Brown. I got into all these other
so you
things.
got into Ivy League then, at least.
I got into some really good schools, and I was headed, but... So here's the turn. Dawn says, I think you got something, so audition. So Doc, she's like, she understands the rigor of, she has respect for theater and the craft. So she says to me, I'm going to help you find monologues. So she helps me find, this woman she held my hand, man, because I knew nothing. And so she finds the dramatic monologue. And then, check this out, talk about clocking your 10,000 hours. She made me go into multiple classrooms during English in front of high schoolers and perform my audition for Carnegie Mellon over and over and over again. She's like, listen, if you can do it in front of 30, 16-year-olds,
genius.
You're going to go in front of these. So, but then it gets even better. Check this out. Now, Carnegie auditions in like 4 or 5 major cities: Pittsburgh, New York, LA, in New Orleans. Now, New Orleans has a hurricane. They cancel New Orleans. They bring it to Miami, but because of the cancellation, Now, if I were to audition, check this out. Check out the numbers and God's orchestration. If I had auditioned in Pittsburgh, New York, or LA, on average at these auditions would be 500, 600, 800 kids coming for 40 slots. They cancel New Orleans. I audition in Coral Gables, Miami, literally in my backyard. So, I mean, because I've got no money to fly. So he brings the audition to me. I end up auditioning with only 7 kids. 7 instead of 1,000. I'll be honest with you, bro. Yeah, God had his hands on me, but had I auditioned in a city with 500, 600, I wouldn't have been able to compete. God was like, I mean, yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
right?
God had it from the foundation of the earth, bro. I mean, yes, but I understand what you're saying.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
A lot of competition, man. So he was like, I'm going to make this as easy as possible. It's easier to stand out in front of 6 or 7 kids and so I get in, man. And at 17, I go to Carnegie.
And like, okay, so at this point, you've not yet accepted Jesus into your heart.
Cultural Catholic at best.
Cultural Catholic. So you obviously, I'm sure you believed in the Lord, right?
I knew about Jesus.
Yeah,
I didn't know
but you didn't know him. No. So what was your experience like at conservatory? Because, obviously we both went there. Our experience is very different compared to what we do now. Yeah. So how did you navigate your 4 years at Carnegie?
Yeah, messily. I was.
How did you land that puppy?
Yeah, I don't know that I ever landed. I think I actually crashed into a couple buildings while I was there. I mean, listen, I got there when I was 17. I was so poor. It was the first time I got on a plane, was to go to college. I was so poor, I didn't have a pillow. So like I slept without a pillow for months and months and months. I had some of the best teachers on the planet. I mean, phenomenal people. Liz Orion was the head of drama at the time. She was a Brit. I think she studied at one of the major schools there. And Don was my voice and speech teacher to this day. We're still really, really good friends. He's in his 70s now. I consider him a life mentor and a creative father to me as well. So I want to be really clear. Carnegie is one of the best schools on the planet. The training, the quality of training that I got there was unbelievable. And I think I had a lot of good intended people. But when a young kid who's 17 years old is away from home for the first time, let's just say, man, it was pretty messy with girls and in the social scene and stuff. It's like it never got as bad as drugs. I was a pretty clean kid during that time. Yeah. But like it was pretty messy. And I think maybe the hardest thing for me, aside from being incredibly lonely, was I just had no idea who I was. I had no sense of identity. So I was only as good as the last exercise I had done in class. And I also didn't know how to take care of myself. So when I was trying to go places emotionally and stuff, I could be pretty abusive in order to like get to places that I thought were real and authentic, very methody, very.
What do you know at 17? That's why back in the UK we advise a lot of people not to start drama school till you're 21.
I love that
because the thing is, it's like you are having to deal with
unless you have a school like BCA.
Oh no, 100%. BCA is a very different.
Well, because I think if you're going to come at 17, bro, you need to have people that care about you, like mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters.
Which is how we structure it, right? We have pastors, we have mothers and fathers all around, not to cocoon or mollycoddle, but to actually say help, this is what required. It's help, guide, mentor, coach, and teach. So I think it's really. At 17 is such a young and vulnerable age to,
it's a good word, vulnerable.
You know what I mean? It's because that whole method thing, it's one of the things that is very divisive in technique throughout, modern dramatic thought really is like using your past experiences to actually,
I'll tell you a not so funny story. I had to do a sense memory exercise where I had to look at pictures. Or I chose to. I had a cigar box. I still remember this. I had a cigar box, and it was full with pictures. And it was just understanding. It's this exercise that you do to kind of tap into your heart so that you can access your emotions, your emotional instrument, or whatever. And so the problem is I had just gotten back, and my girlfriend from high school, who I was still trying to connect with during my first year of college, had just broken up with me. I choose to do an exercise completely unprocessed, like literally it's Monday morning and she broke up with me on Saturday or Sunday. Car ride back home with guys, so no time to process emotion whatsoever. I step in and I do this exercise. I open the box. I get to about the third picture and I start to convulsively, ugly cry in front of all of my peers and can't stop. So my teacher, who didn't know what to do with me, Barbara Mackenzie Wood, who's a sweetheart. She's a sweetheart. She says, David, why don't you step outside? So I step outside by the bathroom, continue to cry for about another hour. And then she says, she ends class. I missed the rest of class. She comes outside. She's like, next time you might just want to be careful, sweetie. But you don't know.
Especially not at that age. And I think, there are parts of that I had value in, and this is not going into kind of like an acting technique class, but I think that we do have to be careful in our technique.
We do.
And I think we do have to, involving the Lord in our technique, as you know, from screenwriting and acting and myself with technique and directing and stuff. It's like,
it changes everything.
If you do not involve the Lord, it goes a very, 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 very different way.
I'm reminded of what Bill says. He says, human reason outside of the presence of God is demonic by nature. It's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah.
But shy of the demonic, it's that it opens you. It opens you to a type of pain and a type of vulnerability that I think is unsafe without him.
Yeah. So talk me through. You finish school, and then what happens after that?
I'm 21, man. I get repped. I think you and I shared and have commiserated. My first agent, who I believe has passed on. We went through some rough moments together.
Yeah.
He wasn't always the kindest of men, but he saw me, and he was one of the few. It was William Morris, and it was this small agency. William Morris, a big agency.
Yep.
Passed me up. So some of my classmates got 13, 15 meetings. I got 2.
Well, at least you got WME there. It was good, man, bro. Good.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I remember going in a really bad suit. You would have totally made fun of me to the WME meeting. Completely
Miami
overdressed.
Vice?
Yeah, it was just shy. Let's just say it was ill-fitting. You wouldn't have been proud.
Great. Dang.
It was cheap, ill-fitting. Didn't get that one. But here's the deal. I end up actually getting in a play written by Terrence McNally that starred Nathan Lane, John Glover, Benjamin Hickey, and a bunch of other really well-known guys. Nathan Lane, you would know him as the meerkat from from Lion King and a bunch of other things. So I made my Broadway debut. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I was an understudy in the show. So, I graduated at 21, and about 6 months later, I land my first Broadway show.
Wow.
But as an understudy. And I was covering a young gentleman who had just been diagnosed with epilepsy. And they were getting his medication. So now we had moved from off-Broadway to Broadway in time for, Valentine's Day or whatnot. It was a play about a group of friends that meet over these subsequent summer holidays and so on and so forth. And there was some nudity in the play. Again, disclaimer, this was pre-Jesus. And so I'm sitting up in the balcony watching the actors, 2 young actors that I cover in the show. Now, we had just moved to the new space. I had never yet actually rehearsed on the new stage, just on the smaller off-Broadway stage. We just hadn't had time. And so we transfer the show. I'm up there, and all of a sudden, at the end of Act 1, the young actor who has epilepsy stops speaking. Now, he's in the middle of this diatribe, this argument across this long table with John Glover, and he stops talking in front of like a couple thousand people. And then he walks off stage. And we hear this strange sound, like this wailing from off stage. And one of the other understudies that was up in the loge with me, the balcony looking, he says, "You're going on." So I run downstairs, and the guy's having an epileptic fit. They're in the stairwell. Goodness. They literally went out. This is an old theater joke. But it was true. One of the actors goes out to the edge of the stage. The audience doesn't know what the heck is going on. There's hubbub and stuff. And they say, literally, "Is there a doctor in the house?" 3 doctors come up. They do all the wrong things. They hold him down. They do all the things you're not supposed to do with an epileptic. Anyways, dude, they ambulance him to a hospital. Next thing I know, I'm getting in costume and like hitting play on a VCR or a DVD player. We literally just take it a few lines back. Nathan Lane looks at me. He says, "Where do you want to take it from?" I'm like deer in the headlights. He's like, "I'll feed you a line." We go out on stage. The audience applauds, and I begin my Broadway debut by ending Act 1. Act 2 begins with me fully naked up on a raft, making my Broadway debut, standing in front of a couple thousand people with this monologue. I get dressed on the stage, the whole thing. the piece, we won't talk about it too much, but all of this to say that I end up making my Broadway debut. At the end, at the curtain call, Nathan Lane goes to the foot of the stage and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for navigating this with us. The actor, who I won't name, is safe and at the hospital. And I believe tonight is our fine understudy, David Noroña's Broadway debut. Standing ovation.
Come on.
Standing ovation. It turns out, there's a Today Show producer in the house who ends up interviewing me for the Today Show.
Wow.
Today Show. Secondly, a New York Times reporter just happened to be there and ends up writing a story on me and the understudy who was covering Glenn Close in a musical that she was doing at the time. I mean, it's like
Sunset?
the stuff of Sunset Boulevard. Yeah. That's right.
So you spent how many years doing theater before you kind of transitioned into
2
TV
years,
and film?
man. 2 years. And then, the sunshine, the car, the money, the fame of Los Angeles called me.
Because you were in New York, right?
I was in New York, did a bunch of theater, whatever, Broadway, off-Broadway stuff, man. And then I landed this audition. First of all, I get measles doing a show regionally. We went to a benefit lunch and there were kids that had, chicken pox. I break out and I look like a character from Star Trek or something. My future wife comes to pick me up. I had 200 blisters on my face. I thought my acting career was over. And then my agent, Ron Ross, whose name I just remembered, he says, I got an audition for a TV musical starring Angela Lansbury called Mrs. Santa Claus. I said, Ron, you don't understand. I look like a sci-fi character. He says, I don't care what you look like. You put makeup on and you go to this audition. So I go and I land this movie musical. This was before Annie and Cinderella with Whitney. Mrs. Santa Claus kind of started this trend of music theater on television and film.
Right.
Starring Angela Lansbury from Murder, She Wrote. And
she just passed.
She just passed, man, at 96. Yeah,
crazy,
at 96 years old. So we do this movie musical, man, and I made more money in 7 weeks than I had made in 2 years.
Crazy.
In New York. And I said, I like this.
Yeah, I bet.
So I moved to LA.
It's funny, our connection before we even knew was Angela Lansbury because she trained at the same conservatory as I did.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So I went to the same conservatory.
I don't know if I knew that. No. Okay, I don't know.
Yeah. So she went to Arts Ed, I went to Arts Ed.
Wow.
So the same conservatory, which is cool.
It's very cool, man. She's a legend.
6 degrees of separation.
Come on, baby.
So you moved to LA and then you spend best part of the next 16 years, right?
Yep.
Working pretty much constantly in TV and film.
Yeah, mainly television. Mainly television just became my bread and butter, man.
So how do you find the difference between TV and theater, like your first experience, right? Because obviously at the time, Carnegie's not going to have had much on camera, is it?
None at all.
Right.
Like very, very little.
So you trained in theater, you trained classically. How did you make that transition between?
Quite easily by mistake, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the consistent notes was, speak up.
On stage?
Speak up all the time. And then, my buddies, I'm a weird cat when it comes to music theater because I like Sondheim and I like the stuff that feels a little bit more authentic and gritty and honest. If it gets a little bit too jazz
You mean like Grease and Starlight Express? I'm joking.
No, don't even get me started on musicals that have roller skates and cats.
Oh, I love that.
Anyways, I'm not a fan of Weber, but
yeah.
So I was always a fan of film. In fact, what I would do is one of my big messes at Carnegie was when I turned down the lead in Three Penny Opera, which was a mistake on my part, to do one day in a film, but with John Cusack.
And Debbie Mazur. Yeah.
Because I was fascinated by the subtlety. And in fact, the on-camera class by famous British actor who's done 300
Michael Caine.
Michael Caine.
Yeah.
Transformative for me.
Yeah.
Actually, if I were to give you a short answer, it was watching that on VHS or laser DVD that gave me my on-camera training.
We still use that now.
It's because it's perfect. Because he's a genius and he's done how many hundreds of films. Bro, for me, it was that was an easy, getting the job's not so easy.
Yeah.
Technically, I don't know, somehow it made sense for me.
Yeah.
It just made sense for me. And so I didn't get a lot of gigs in the first couple of years. If anybody had told me just buy some better clothes, get a tan, get a good haircut, and you'll work in LA, in addition to having some training, might help. But it took me a while just because New York is about gritty, where you can look all pasty and, not be, you can be disheveled because you're like a theater actor. LA, man, you had to go in looking tight And I didn't really fully get that. Once I got that, and I realized that going to the tanning bed was, equal tantamount to continuing taking some acting classes, I started to book. I booked a ton of commercials, Spanish, English. I did a series of budget rent-a-car commercials that made me $100,000 one year.
Wow.
Yeah. Not bad.
Not bad.
And then guest spots, and then I landed my first series regular with Josh Brolin and Audra McDonald, and I was 29 going on 30, and I thought it was all going to be stars and kitty cats after that.
So in this journey of acting, like you're obviously doing the majority of Without Jesus. What caused you to realize that I've had a great element of success? You spent 18 years up to this point earning a living from your craft, right? Which not many people...
100%, bro. 100%. I was actually able to pay my bills exclusive and raise kids in a family.
Which is great, which is not a lot of people can say that.
Yeah.
So at what point did you kind of feel that this life that you were living, there was something else to it, that you were missing something?
I mean, you know this story, but I think it warrants, because this is the midpoint. Like if you're a student of screenwriting, you know that the midpoint turn is the jujitsu flip 180, get the protagonist on his back. So what happened was I told my manager, Howard Green, who I've been with now for over 20 years, I said, hey, I'm burnt out on TV. I'd done a couple series regulars, made Monopoly money for a while there. The money wasn't necessarily all there, but I just said, it doesn't matter. I need to get back to the boards, meaning the stage. And I auditioned for a sweet little musical that at this point was just going to be, regional in down in SoCal, and San Diego at the La Jolla Playhouse, a little musical by the name of Jersey Boys. And I remember interesting connections with this. When my dad got off the plane from Cuba at 4 or 5, the first American pop song he remembers hearing is Sherry, which is a song by Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. And so I absolutely loved 50s doo-wop, and Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons they were like heroes to me, man. Working class kids from Jersey, Italian. And so I remember actually going to the audition in LA for Jersey Boys at the Debbie Reynolds studio, which is this dinky little studio that's literally it was in North Hollywood, 5 minutes from my apartment.
Right.
Or from my house. And I go to the bathroom, and who comes out but Frankie Valli? Next thing I know, 10 minutes later, I'm actually singing Sherry in front of Frankie Valli.
Oh, because they were on the audition panel.
He was there for the audition, I think for the callback. Anyways, it's in the key of C, and then Frankie, just to kind of push me, he says to me, "Can you take it up a half a step?"
Wow.
First of all, nobody sings in the key of C sharp. It's the ugliest key ever. But I sang it. I sang Sherry for Frankie Valli a half a step higher than he recorded it. I get it. I go to La Jolla. But here's the deal. So here I am in a musical where I have 28 songs. I never leave stage. And the problem is I hadn't actually kept my vocal technique up.
Right.
So I start to really, really struggle. And now I have to not talk except when I'm on the stage. Except when I'm in rehearsal. I have my eldest son, Zion, is 6 months old at this time. And so now my wife and my kid, I'm not talking to them,
right,
because I have to save my vocal cords. So I go into the show, and this is, again, I'm not saved at the time. I start getting addicted to pornography, to sleeping pills. I'm a train wreck. My wife doesn't want to be around me because I'm not talking to her. But here I am every night. And when I sing Can't Take My Eyes Off of You, I'm getting standing ovations. But I had never been more miserable in my life.
Right.
Anyways, I end up with vocal issues. I'm taking prednisone, a steroid, to shrink my cords every night so I can sing. They're sticking a camera down my nose into my throat to check for nodes or calluses on my cords. We finish the show. They're offering me Broadway. They're offering me $60,000 just to sit around and wait for the Broadway production. I'm back home now in SoCal. But because the show's been so successful on a theatrical run and I'm only making $700 a week, I'm actually running into the red every month. So now I'm in debt, even though I'm in a hit. And I need the $60,000, but we're in negotiations, and they wouldn't give me matinees off, which is now traditional and standard for the show.
Right.
Now the show has 3 Frankie Vallis at the ready anytime, and the lead Frankie never does the matinees because it's too grueling vocally.
On the vocally, yeah.
Well, at the time, they wouldn't allow me. So I have a panic attack. I wake up one night at 3 a.m. and I say to my wife, we're in debt. We're tapping into the equity of our home. And I say to her, I can't do the show. Long story short.
Never used click track, nothing.
There were click tracks for like transitions, backing vocals, all this kind of stuff. Not really. I mean, there were a couple times where we had to do it because of my vocal issues. And now, by the way, there's click tracks in most Broadway musicals, but whatever. It's a dark little secret. But long story short, bro, I pass on it and literally all heaven breaks loose on me. I mean, I've got one of the Four Seasons calling me, the director, everybody. I pass up on this show. I get a TV show. So now it's going to Broadway. Jersey Boys is going to, but I'm making more money doing a TV show. Yeah. So I'm thinking I'm the man. The TV show gets canceled. And I absolutely bottom out and collapse. And then at this point, we're in financial distress. My career's in the toilet. My stepmother, Myra, passes away at 49 from a sudden brain aneurysm. She falls. She has a brain bleed. She's dead. There's a series of catastrophes in my family. And I end up, long story short, a year later, in a community college studying Spanish Lit, thinking that in my insanity, I'm going to become a psychologist and help other people in need.
Right.
And I meet this guy from Liverpool named Ross Cotto, who invites me to coffee right after I bury my stepmom. He brings me to coffee, and I'll never remember the verses, but I remember the feeling when he shared a couple Bible verses with me, and it hits me right in the gut. And I thought to myself, wow, that's in the Bible. I need to look that up. And I end up at this small little charismatic church where it's like a 16-year-old on a guitar.
Is that Malibu? Malibu Vineyard?
This is in Malibu. Yeah. It was an offshoot of the Malibu Vineyard. I ended up in this little park, in this little community center with this 16-year-old girl named Mary and my friend Johnny playing music that sounds like Joni Mitchell. Now, as a Catholic, I'm used to like organs in Latin or something in chorus. And she sings, and I buckle over. And I begin to weep convulsively. And all of the pain that I had been carrying just starts to like pour out of me. And it was in that moment that I encounter Holy Spirit. I don't even know his name. It's the same person who made me leap off that stage into his destiny. It's the same one that encounters me in this church. And dude, I never look back. I immediately, passionately fall in love with the Lord. And my wife calls me because it's a charismatic service. So it's like Bethel. It's like 3 hours long. She's like, hey, are you alive? And I said, I loved it. I just hope you love him as much as I do. We came and we've just never looked back, man.
It's his pursuit, his romantic pursuit of us in our mess is a love story. Mm-hmm. Like it's the quintessential love story, isn't it? He will never ever let you go. Like if you're struggling right now because you think there's no way out in your career, whatever, I just want to let you know that Jesus loves you and never ever stops pursuing you, and he never will.
And he's not the person that the world describes. When you meet him face to face, he is unlike any description you've ever heard, man. He's so intimate and he knows you so well, and he wants all of this stuff that is actually so good for you.
Yeah.
It's just not what you think it is.
It isn't. And I think the reason why he knows how to communicate, listen, Jesus communicates with everybody, right? Obviously. But the tenderness with which he communicates to an artist is because he is an artist. Amen. That it's like, it changes everything because it's like, listen, you think you're an artist and you're like, God has tormented me with this gift. He doesn't. He is an artist himself, not just creator, but artist. Mm-hmm. So then you get saved.
I do.
Right? Then at this point, Zion's 6 months. Mm-hmm. So you've not had any of the other kids yet. Oh, no.
No, by now we've got 2 kids.
Knight and
Isaiah. Knight and Josh, who have the Juvie podcast, which everyone should check out. I've got 2 kids and one soon to be on a way. I go to New York, to Brooklyn. Now I'm saved. I do one more big show with Brooke Shields, Lipstick Jungle and whatnot. And so I think, oh gosh, okay, now I have Jesus and financial success. Little did I know that the Lord had a different kind of turn in story for me.
Wow. So like what brought you, and I know we're going to wrap this up in a bit, but like what brought you to
Bethel?
To Bethel. To BSSM, to the mountain town.
Yeah, man. So, when you say yes to the Lord, it's a yes that that offers you everything and costs you everything at the same time. It's not the story that you think you have, the art that you think had this, self-serving fame and glory. It's like he's got all good things for you, but it might not be the story that you had planned in mind. Listen, after 16 years in LA, I had peeked behind Oz's curtain. I had done shows. I had done worked with amazing people, made money, lost money. But here's the thing. Once I encountered him, once I heard Kim Walker talk about this sloppy, wet kiss, I thought, who is that God?
Yeah.
Because I've met you, I've encountered you, but I don't know you that way.
Well.
And so all of a sudden, man, it lit a fire. And this was, it's a longer story, but to get to it, I came here. My midlife crisis wasn't a Corvette and a ponytail.
Yeah.
It was Jesus.
Yeah.
And I came here and I went to BSSM. And what I'll never forget, and I think this is maybe a good place to land this puppy, is that I remember looking up on stage there in the mosh pit of love at the front of the Civic, worshiping. And I remember looking out on stage and people were manifesting and encountering God in a way that I didn't fully understand, but I wanted to. And I said, God, why don't I feel you and experience you this way? And I looked out on the stage where the worship leaders were, and he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, you see on the page and the stage what others do not. That's how I speak to you. And that was the beginning of the love affair, of him revealing to me that he knew me not just as a son, but as an artist. And he began to reform, redefine me as an artist and why I was given the gift that I was given.
Wow, that's amazing. We're going to continue more with our story and how we met in the next episode. But I want to ask you a question in kind of concluding. I know you consider yourself first and foremost as a storyteller.
Yeah.
Right? But I want to know, what does acting mean to you? Acting
for me is, it's hard to even put it into words. It goes so deep. It's one of my first loves. Singing is another one. They're very closely tied for me. It helps me. Acting for me is understanding humanity. It helps me love people. Many of the characters that I've played have been broken.
Yeah.
And it just gives me deep compassion for the frailty and the resiliency of being a human being. That, for me, acting is the study of humanity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love to say it. Somebody asked me the other day, and I was like, as controversial as this could sound, because Jesus is life.
You? Controversy? What?
Well, you've got to add a little bit in there. But acting for me is it's life. Jesus is my life. Of course, that's the given. But it's if you were to take that away, it'd be like taking breath away.
Yeah. 20 your lungs.
But do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
So, David, thank you for sharing with us,
pleasure,
man.
bro.
It's so exciting for you to hear both of our journeys, and now the next episode where we talk about how we both got to know each other in this kind of radical journey of
Our
what
love
ended,
child.
Right,
The
our love
birthing
child.
of our love
Exactly.
child.
Right, but do you know what I mean? Of how this beautiful thing of performing in the presence and performing from your identity, not for it, came about. So we look forward to seeing you soon. God bless you.